Hi everybody, welcome back for another Sippin' on Sunshine video. Today we are on video number 6. We're going to be making the picnic block, soda block, refreshments block, and grapes block. I have everything cut and prepped. If you haven't cut your batting for your picnic block, you need a piece 9.5 by 11.5. For the soda bottles, 5.5 by 9.5. The refreshments block needs a 7.5 inch square, and the grapes block needs a 5.5 inch square. Let's jump right in and get started. Background quilting for the picnic block is 8.5 by 10.5 inches. I have to use my 9.5 by 14 inch hoop for that. I'm going to put my stabilizer in my hoop and head over to the machine. We're going to want the colored linen on our machine. Let's go ahead and load our files. We'll start with our background quilting. We're looking for KDQ 530 Weather 7 8 by 10. 530 Weather 7. We need the 8 by 10. 8 by 10. We'll go ahead and hit set and then add, and we'll add our picnic block. Here's our picnic block. And we're ready to go. I've got my linen color on my machine. I'm going to go ahead and move all the way through the background quilting since we've done all those steps before in previous videos. The background quilting is done. We are going to start off with the color Mocha. We're going to stitch out the blanket placement line. Grab your blanket fabric, cover the placement line, then we'll stitch our blanket tack down and trim everything outside of the tack down line. Once that's trimmed, you can stitch out the blanket decorative outlines. Once the outline has stitched, we have to change our bobbin thread, not our top thread. We're going to put in our water-soluble thread because we're going to stitch out the blanket fringe. This is the water-soluble thread that I've been using for this project. Hi everybody, when we're changing out the water-soluble bobbin thread, we're also supposed to change the top thread to the color Buttercup. I actually didn't even see that. I saw this and I was looking here, and at all of these, they're all the same color. I did not change my color for the top thread. I've got that loaded. We're going to stitch out the blanket tassel fringe. The fringe has stitched out. Boy, am I lucky. I really like it in this color. I think I'm going to like this with the matching decorative more than if I would have switched it to the correct color. After you stitch out the fringe, we need to change our bobbin back to the regular bobbin thread before the next step. I've got my regular bobbin thread in. If you switched your thread for the fringe to the Buttercup, you want to go ahead and change it back to Mocha. And we're going to stitch out the blanket woven edge fills. It's going to be along the top and the bottom. The next two steps are for the sunglasses if you're not using the embellishment kit. If you need to stitch them out, you want to use hickory and stitch out the lens fills. And then it has you switching to aloe to stitch out the rims. I am using the embellishment kit, so I'm going to hit my needle minus plus and go through the lenses and go through the rims, and then we're ready to go to the next step. That step is number 8. We're going to switch to aloe and stitch the flower, stems, and leaves fill. We're going to switch to the color linen and stitch out the placement line for the plate fabric. Grab your plate fabric. We're going to place that right side up. Make sure to cover the stitch line. Then we'll stitch the tack down and trim. When I'm trimming the fabric for this, I'm going to go back and get these couple of jump threads on my stems and leaves. I've got that trimmed. I got rid of my jump threads. We're going to stitch out the plate satin outline. Next thing we're going to do is switch to the color Tango. We're going to stitch out the flip-flop placement lines. We'll place our fabric, tack it down, trim, and stitch out the decorative outline. Same steps that we just did for the plate. I'm going to go ahead and run those together. The flip-flops are done. We're going to keep the same color on our machine. We're going to stitch out flower 1 fill and then strawberry 1 fill. There are 2 steps on your embroidery machine. I'm going to go ahead and run them together. We're going to switch to Monarch and stitch out the strawberry 2 fill. We're going to switch to the color Butter and we're going to stitch out the placement line for our bouquet. Our fabric for the bouquet is the micro velvet, so you want to check your nap and make sure it's lying flat this direction. We're going to cover the placement line, tape it on both sides to make sure it stays in place, then tack it down and trim. We're going to leave the color Butter on the machine and stitch out the flower 2 fill. We want to switch to linen and stitch out the bouquet string detail. The next 2 steps they have in the color Buttercup. My Buttercup is a very, very bright yellow. I'm actually going to use the color Butter instead. I think it's going to look better overall since I have this color on this side. We're going to stitch out the flip-flop straps and then the seeds on the strawberries. If you're following the colors in the instructions, you want to switch to Buttercup for that. I just think that's going to be a little too bright, so I'm going to use my color that I have for Butter. The color looks good. These have jump threads. They did not stitch 1 dot at a time. I'm kind of bummed about that. We're going to switch to Aloe and we're going to stitch out the strawberry leaves and stems filled. We're going to switch to the color Mercury and we're going to stitch out the silverware. Our last 2 steps are going to stitch out the slice of bread. We're going to start with the color Cappuccino and stitch out the bread, and then the color Fox and stitch out the outer crust detail. Everything is stitched out. We're going to get this off our machine. I'm going to leave it in the hoop. We're going to flip it to the back and remove the water-soluble bobbin thread. I've got this on a board on my lap. I've had a spray bottle of water. We want to remove the water-soluble bobbin thread. We want to go ahead and spray it with water to dissolve that thread. When you use a cotton swab or you can use your fingernails to rub the threads, we should see some thread loops popping up. Let's go ahead and spray. And then you just start rubbing. I like to let it sit for a little bit. There you go. You can see there's little loops here, here, and here. The bobbin thread is right down the middle of the fringe. So this is really easy to know that if you're dissolving the thread or not. Go all the way down to the edge, and then we'll do the other side. Once you've got the bobbin thread dissolved, you want to flip your hoop to the front, and we can use tweezers to help bring up that fringe. Just sort of slide it under and lift. And it should lift right up. If it's stuck, if it doesn't want to lift, you may need to go to the back, spray with a little bit more water. These look like they're going to come up just fine. I got all the fringe up. It tends to dry really fast, at least here in Arizona. So by the time I was done working one side, when I went to work the other side, it was already drying. I also took a minute and cut the jump threads. These are really tight. It was very difficult to cut these. I'm worried about getting the pink and the red caught underneath. I'm probably just going to leave it just like that. Since this is wet, I'm going to set this aside to trim. Today we'll trim all of our blocks together at the end, and we'll get set up to work on our next block. Next up is the soda bottles. I've got my 8x12 hoop out for this because our background quilting is 4.5 by 8.5. The next smallest hoop that I have is an 8-inch square, so I have to go to my 8x12 for that. Let's bring up our quilting. We need KDQ 529 drink 3, and we need 4 by 8. Go ahead and set that, and then we'll add our soda block. I've got the color linen on my machine. We're going to go ahead and work up through our background quilting. Our quilting is done. Keep the colored linen on your machine and stitch out the straw stripes 1 fill. switch to the color Buttercup and we're going to stitch out the straw stripes to fills. We're done with the straw. We want to switch to the color Tango. We're going to stitch out the placement line for Soda 1. Grab your Soda 1 fabric. It's directional. Stripes are running up and down. That was noted during the cutting instructions. If you missed it and your stripes are running this way, it doesn't matter. It's going to look just fine. I went ahead and cut mine according to the instructions, so I do have my stripes running up and down. I'm going to add a piece of tape. We'll stitch the tack down, then we'll trim outside the tack down line and stitch out the decorative outline. Next, we're going to switch to the color Buttercup. That's my bright yellow. We're going to stitch out the placement line for the second soda bottle, place the fabric, tack it down, trim, and stitch the decorative outline. Exactly like what we just did, I'm going to run all of that together. We're going to switch to linen and stitch out the soda bubbles. The bubbles have stitched out. They've got jump threads. When I'm cutting jump threads, I'm using these scissors, and sometimes I have a hard time getting underneath to cut the jump threads because they're so tight. Let me know in the comments what your favorite scissors are for cutting jump threads. We want to switch to the color Mercury, and we're going to stitch out the bottles placement lines. We're going to be placing our vinyl. There's a few things we're going to need to do before we do that. First is cut the jump threads. After you've cut the jump threads, you want to make sure there's no stray threads. Like right here, I've got a pink thread. I want to make sure that that goes away. Dog hair, cat hair, whatever you've got. And then you want to take your vinyl and clean your vinyl. I usually use an eyeglass cleaning cloth and get that nice and clean. The vinyl is tacked down. I've got a piece of fuzz under mine. And we're going to trim outside the outermost line. So all these little details and things, you don't have to trim any of that. We're trimming around the outside line. Once you've got your vinyl trimmed, we're going to put linen back on the machine and we're going to stitch out the bottle's details. It looks like it's just going to be little circles at the bottom. Then after that, we're going to switch to aloe and stitch out the bottle cap fill. I'll go ahead and run those two together. Once your bottle cap has stitched out, we're going to switch to the color Ocean and we're going to stitch out the placement line for our bottle 1 stripe fabric. Grab your bottle 1 stripe fabric, go ahead and place that, stitch the tack down, trim, and then stitch the bottle 1 stripe decorative outline. Once you've stitched out the decorative outline, you can leave the color Ocean on your machine. We're going to stitch out the Lebo 1 placement. Grab your Lebo 1 fabric, make sure it's right side up, fusible side down. Cover the placement line. They show a piece of tape on both sides, probably because there's vinyl and it might slip. So go ahead and tape that into place. Stitch the tack down, trim, and then stitch the decorative outline. We're going to switch to the color Monarch and we're going to work on the label for the second bottle. It's going to be the same procedure. We're going to stitch out a placement line, place the fabric, stitch the tack down, trim, and stitch the decorative outline. I'll go ahead and run all those steps together. Leave Monarch on your machine and stitch out the strawberry fill. We're going to switch to the color Clover and stitch out the strawberry leaves and stems fill. We're going to switch to Buttercup, stitch out the strawberry seeds and then the orange fill. It shows us 2 steps. I'm going to run it together. Next we'll switch to the color Butter and we're going to stitch out the orange slice fill and the rind details. Switch to linen and we're going to stitch out the inner rind details. You'll see on your machine a little line. Don't stitch that. You're done at this point except for cutting the jump threads. So I need to cut off these jump threads. We're going to go ahead and start the refreshments block. Looks like the quilting for that block is 6.5 inches square. I'll be able to use my 8-inch square hoop for that. Let's go ahead and load the next block. We're going to load the quilting KDQ 529 drink 3 6x6. 529 drink 3, and then we need 6x6. Let's add our quilting file. We're making the refreshments block next. It's got the pitcher and the glass, and then an orange slice right here. We're ready to go. We start this one out with the color butter for the quilting. So make sure you've got the color butter on your machine. If you want, you can do the placement and the tack down with a neutral thread and switch to butter. I already put butter on my machine, so you'll see that throughout the background quilting. Once the quilting has stitched, we're going to switch to Tango. We're going to stitch out the liquid 2 placement line. Placement line has stitched out. This was one of the pieces of fabric that I didn't cut right. I made a mistake. It's supposed to be 3 inches wide, and I cut it at 2.5. Let's see if it'll fit. Oh, it'll fit. It's going to be close, but it'll fit. No problem. We want to go ahead and cover the placement line. I'm actually going to pull this off, make sure I get this lined up, tape it in place, stitch the tack down, trim, and then stitch the liquid 2 decorative outline and details. I see more jump threads. We are going to need to cut those because we're going to be adding vinyl. I'm going to go ahead and cut those right now. Then I'm going to put mercury on the machine and stitch out the pitcher placement line. That's all stitched out. You want to go ahead and take off the tape and trim just around the outside. Wow, I just barely got it right there at the top. Looks like I just caught it. I've got that trimmed. The next thing we want to do is switch to linen, and we're going to stitch the straw stripes 1, and then after that aloe for straw stripes 2. I'll run these two together. We're going to switch to Buttercup, and we're going to stitch out the liquid 1 placement line. Grab your liquid 1 fabric, find your liquid 1 placement line. It kind of disappeared right into the background. Going to tape that down. We'll stitch the tack down, trim, and then stitch out the decorative outline and details. Today just seems to be a jump thread kind of day. We got a couple here. These are far enough apart where they're easy to remove. It's those little tiny ones that are so close together. I have a lot of trouble removing them. Once you've got those removed, we've got our glass vinyl. I'm going to get a look at that, make sure it's nice and clean, check for any stray threads, then we'll place it over the glass, tape it, do the tack down, and trim. I've got that cleaned and taped into place. I had a visitor outside the door. Look, somebody wanted to come in and join me. Hi, Mr. Squirrel. We're going to go ahead and stitch out the tack down and then trim. I'm thinking sleep deprivation and embroidery aren't a good thing. Do you see what I did? I stitched that in the yellow color. It's supposed to be in mercury. We're supposed to switch to mercury, stitch out the placement line, which actually got stitched right over, so it doesn't matter. Then place your vinyl and then stitch the tack down. Mine's in yellow. It doesn't bother me. It looks like a nice yellow trimmed glass. I'm going to go ahead and leave it. I am not going to pick it out and cut another piece of vinyl and restitch that in mercury. I'm going to trim that. That's all trimmed. I really like the way that looks. I kind of wish I would have messed up over here and done this in pink. It reminds me of when you buy bright and colorful trimmed glasses for the summer. I think this would really look good in this color right here, the one we use to outline the liquid. And then you'd have a pink face and an orange glass. I'm going to slide this back on my machine and refer to my instructions. And we're going to stitch straw stripes 1 in linen, and straw stripes 2 in aloe, and then the straw detail in linen. I'll go ahead and run all of those steps together. While I'm changing my thread, here's the reason for my sleep deprivation. That is my very senior Chi-Weenie Jacqueline, who we adopted about 8 years ago from a horrible hoarding situation. She has dementia. She does take medication, but she's really old. It's getting worse, and she gets up several times a night. However, she's one of the happiest dogs I have ever known. She lives to eat. I'm getting that thread on my machine. Let's get stitching. Next, it has us switching to mercury for the glass rim detail. Since I used the wrong color on that, I used my bright yellow. I'm actually going to stitch that in bright yellow. It's going to look weird if I stitch that in mercury. I like that even more now. That looks really good. If you're watching this before you stitch out your blocks, you can decide if you want to do the same. If I made this block again, I would even do this mercury as the pink. I think that would look really pretty. We're going to switch to the color butter, and we're going to stitch out our orange placement line. To grab your orange fabric, go ahead and cover that. They show it taped on both sides again because there's vinyl. We'll stitch the tack down and trim, and then stitch the orange decorative outline and rind satin outline. We're going to switch to the color Buttercup and stitch out the orange slice details, and then when that's done, the last step is with linen, and that will be stitching out the inner rind. We are all done with this block. We're going to start on the grapes block. The quilting for that one is 4.5 inches square. I'll be using a 5x7 hoop for that. We're on our last block today. We need to load KDQ 527 Outdoors 6 4x4 horizontal design. 4x4. Let's find the 4x4. Horizontal. This is the one we want. It matches the picture in our instructions. Go ahead and set that, and then add your grapes file. You want the color linen on your machine. I'm going to go ahead and work through the background quilting. We're going to switch to the color aloe. That's going to be your darker green, and we're going to stitch out the leaf fill. We're going to switch to the color fox and stitch out the stem fill. We need to put the color clover on our machine. That's your lighter of your 2 greens. We're going to stitch the outline for the grapes A fabric. You want to grab your grapes A fabric, not felt, but fabric. There's a lot of little green pieces in this bag, so make sure you've got the grapes A fabric. It should have fusible on the back. Go ahead and cover that placement line. We'll stitch the tack down, trim everything outside the tack down, and then stitch the light grapes A decorative outline. Still using the color clover, and we're going to stitch out the medium grapes placement lines. Grab your medium grapes felt, which is the lighter of the 2 colors of felt. Make sure to cover those placement lines. I'm going to go ahead and tape that in place, stitch the tack down, and then trim. There's no decorative outline with this. Once you have those trimmed, you're going to switch to aloe, your darker green, stitch out the dark grapes placement line. Grab a piece of the darker felt, cover the placement lines, stitch the tack down and trim. Switch to clover, we're going to stitch out the medium grapes placement line. Grab that lighter color felt. This is a really big piece. If you want to save on your embellishments, you could kind of place it like that and then stitch it closer to the outside line. Let's stitch the tack down and trim. We're going to go back to aloe, stitch the dark grapes placement lines, place our last piece of the dark green felt, we'll stitch the tack down and trim. Once you've got that trimmed, we're going to go back to clover. We're going to stitch out the light grapes bee placement lines. You should have a piece of the light green fabric left fusible on the back. Go ahead and place that to cover those placement lines. We'll stitch the tack down, trim, and then there will be a decorative outline for the fabric. Got those trimmed, I'm going to stitch the decorative outline. We're going to cover this with our vinyl, so check, make sure there's no stray threads, anything that you want to trim a little bit better. I already cleaned my vinyl. I'm going to cover the grapes, add tape on either side, and then we're going to stitch out, they're calling it the Grapes Shine Tack Down line. You're done at your machine for this. You need to remove the tape and then trim the vinyl on the outside only. So you leave the shiny vinyl over all of the grapes. I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and then we're going to trim all of our blocks. We're going to trim our blocks. I've got my rotating cutting mat. If we can use an orange pop ruler, I will use the orange pop ruler. The picnic block trims to 8.5 by 10.5. There is an orange pop ruler for that. I've gone over how to use these before. I'll go ahead and center that and we'll trim. If you've noticed the band-aid, that's because while these blocks were stitching out, we were assembling the very last piece of furniture to go into the new room, and I nailed myself with a screwdriver. So sorry about the band-aid. Let's trim. The soda block trims to 4.5 by 8.5. The instructions have us using the multiple orange pop rulers. We did that once before. That's just not my favorite thing to do. I have an 8.5 inch wide ruler. I'm going to line that up, trim the sides, and then I'll trim the other two sides right on the stitch lines. Do you see how you see the thread and a little bit of space at the top, and then on the bottom no thread? I didn't quite have it centered. Nobody is ever going to know when it's in the quilt. Let's go on to the Refreshments block. This block trims to 6.5 inches square, and we do have an orange pop ruler for that, so I'll trim using that. And our little grapes block trims to 4.5 inches square. We do have an orange pop ruler for that. All the blocks we finished today, everything turned out great. Let's look at what we're going to work on next week. Next week will be video 7. We're going to work on our basket blocks. I haven't forgotten about the filler blocks. I'm thinking if these don't take a whole lot of time, I might put the filler blocks here. We'll see how long it takes to stitch these out. Thank you for joining me for another Sippin' on Sunshine video. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Any comments or questions, please leave them below the video. I really do appreciate everyone watching, giving the video a thumbs up, and a special thank you to Kimberbell for providing the Sippin' on Sunshine products. If after watching my videos you're considering buying anything you've seen here today, please use the links below. As a Kimberbell affiliate, I get a small commission, but what's more important is it lets Kimberbell know that people are watching and enjoying my content. I will be back next week for video number 7, the basket blocks. See you next time!